The LGBT community is an influential and significant part of America's culture. The community has played a large role in demonstrating America's willingness to embrace and accept an unfamiliar concept, as well as support social change and freedom. Rights for the LGBT community have increased drastically throughout the years, and just as recently as 2015, same-sex marriage was legalized in the United States, which led to almost nationwide joy, felicitation, and celebration. However, America was not always as accepting as it is now, and the LGBT community was once persecuted heavily. In the 1960s, gay bars were often targeted by police and shut down for numerous ridiculous reasons. When the Stonewall Inn was raided by police, the patrons were frustrated and disheartened and decided to fight back. The actions taken by these courageous LGBT members in attendance on this fateful night would forever change America's treatment, perception, and acceptance of the queer community that is ever so important today. The conflict stemming from the Stonewall riots brought about change that the modern LGBT community had never experienced, along with new rights organizations and a sense of pride that many had never been allowed to show. Being a part of the LGBT community in the 20th century was very dangerous for various reasons, the main one being extreme maltreatment and persecution. Groups such as the Ku Klux Klan, Christian terrorists, and even law enforcement officers victimized members of the community and manufactured their lifestyle into a crime. They were hunted like animals, publicly shunned, and even killed due to their self-expression and sexuality. Eventually, pedestrians began blacklisting members of the LGBT community, as they were seen as unfit to be a part of normal society. So members of the community began instituting safe havens, where persecution would be limited and members could meet and fraternize with each other. These institutions were typically clubs, bars, and inns. The areas soon gained a reputation with the public, one of sin and disgust. One of these such places was the Stonewall Inn, which was heavily frequented and was quietly popular with a niche of associates. The Stonewall Inn, located in Greenwich Village, New York City, was mainly a transgender bar, featuring prominent members like the iconic Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, who were extremely liberal and did not believe in simply sitting back and watching the discrimination from civilians, law enforcement, and government officials. The Stonewall Inn was constructed between 1843 and 1846, with the intention of being used as a stable. Later, it became known as Bonnie's Stonewall, a tea room owned by a woman named Bonnie that was publicly established during the Prohibition era. It was later converted into a restaurant and inn, going by the name of Bonnie's Stonewall Inn, and eventually by Stonewall Inn Restaurant. It was burned almost entirely in the mid-1960s and was destroyed internally, forcing closure and repair. It reopened on March 18, 1967, under the ownership of the Genovese family, and became one of the largest openly gay establishments in the U.S. It harbored an intimate dance policy, which was highly popular with the LGBT community and drew attention to it. As popularity increased, NYPD and other law enforcement units were alerted of the continuous gatherings of the ostracized community and uninterrupted, unlicensed selling of alcohol because of its registration as a bottle bar. Initially, the police were restrained from raiding the inn because of bribery on behalf of the Stonewall Inn by the Genovese family. As a result of the bar's popularity and public exposure, the bar was often investigated. But nothing ever came of them, as the owners were often tipped off by cops who had connections to the Italian mafia that played a large role in the gay bar scene around New York City. With this, owners were given time to hide all illegal activities on the premises. On June 28, 1969, however, it was different. In the early morning of this summer day, the Stonewall Inn, full of young members of the LGBT community, mainly drag queens, transgender youth, and those who identified as LGBT and had participated in a night out a few hours prior, was suddenly raided by police. The NYPD and other law enforcement rushed into the bar, armed with warrants, and started to arrest and manhandle the patrons of the Stonewall Inn. Quickly, people in the bar started fighting back.
All of a sudden we hear screaming and everything from the other side. We saw the cops coming in, pushing and shoving, but we started fighting back.
Marsha P. Johnson and Sylvia Rivera, self-proclaimed transgender women and drag queens, rallied young members of the community and organized the conflict in an attempt to fight for their rights. They were finally done putting up with all the maltreatment and shame they had been accustomed to for all of their lives. The people that were forced out of the bar didn't leave, but rather stayed to watch and provide help and support for their fellow LGBT community members. People began throwing anything they had at the officers. Objects like bottles, coins, rocks, and anything else they could find which could potentially be used to hurt or distract the officers. Those that were still in the bar barricaded themselves in and refused to leave. The bar was eventually set on fire due to a mob that had formed outside, but after some convincing and fighting with the crowd, the fire department was able to stop the fire, save those inside the bar, and break up the horde of angry people in the street. Although the outraged mob was dispersed, protests continued for the 5 days following the night of the raid. The protests involved thousands of LGBT people from all over New York City, each person fighting for their rights as a citizen and taking a stand for what they believed in. Even in the quick days after the riots and protests, people began to fight for a change.
The Stonewall riots have had a huge impact, and they really brought a lot of attention to the LGBT community that really hadn't been there before.
In the months after, marches were held in New York City and other cities around the country. On the one-year anniversary of the riots, Stonewall parades were held in New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, and San Francisco in its honor, which set a tradition around the world, which became known as Pride Parades, and typically take place every year in late June. Groups and organizations like the Gay Activists Alliance and Gay Liberation Front were formed and held speeches and meetings to discuss issues and problems that the LGBT community had been experiencing. Within a few years after the riots, more gay rights organizations had sprung up all over the country and began to fight for equality. Now, almost 50 years after the riots, America and many other countries have flipped their narrative and view of the LGBT community. Although the problem of LGBT discrimination is not totally fixed, as we have seen with incidences like the Pulse nightclub shooting in June of 2016, we see that people are fighting to make change. For example, the Equal Marriage Act in June of 2015, a 5-4 ruling by the Supreme Court that allowed same-sex couples to be legally married, along with the establishment of the Stonewall Monument, completed in 2016 by the 44th President of the United States, Barack Obama.
Stonewall will be our first national monument to tell the story of the struggle for LGBT rights.
And most recently with Australia legalizing same-sex marriage by the popular vote. Through the increasing amount of recognition given to the LGBT community with such monuments and changes in legislature, the LGBT community has become more and more influential in today's society. Celebrities like Ellen DeGeneres, Laverne Cox, and Neil Patrick Harris have come out as openly gay, transgender, and bisexual, campaigning for the rights of the LGBT community and making a name for themselves as positive and encouraging role models for all. The LGBT community can even be found in prominent government positions in the United States. Recently, Danica Roem was elected to the state legislature of Virginia, becoming the first openly transgender woman to hold a state legislature position.
On the trans part there? Yeah, I am a transgender woman. We won because I am a transgender woman. Because of my inherent identifiers, not despite them. I never ran away from them. I championed them. And because of that, yeah, Prince William County is now more inclusive than it was before this election.
This shows the progression of Americans in their social and cultural views and gives those who are a part of the LGBT community a feeling of freedom, allowing them to take pride in themselves and their community. The pride felt by those in the LGBT community is seen throughout the world and is felt by billions. Those who are a part of the community and those who are not but are in full support of their friends, family, and even strangers. The Stonewall Rebellion inspired numerous marches, riots, and rebellions with the intention of ending the rigidity between the straight society and the LGBT community. It raised awareness of the treatment that the LGBT community faced and of their lack of rights, and instituted a sense of pride amongst all who were a part of the community.
I love the fact that I'm trans. I love the fact that I'm gay. I love the fact that everybody here is able to look at me and say, that's John Hewitt. He's a good person and he is just like every other guy.
I definitely take pride in myself because coming to terms with who I am as, I don't know if I'm bi or if I'm a lesbian. I'm still trying to figure that out right now, but just the fact that I'm considering that I could be either of those is a big step for me, and I'm really proud of that. It all does go back to the Stonewall riots, and it's just, I really do feel proud, and I've really reclaimed that part of myself.
Our actions as a country and as a people would be regressed to how it was before the eyes of the nation were open for all. The Stonewall Rebellion set into motion a political, economic, and especially social movement that increased LGBT rights and conveyed a strong sense of pride towards all who witnessed them.